Alrighty guys, hello. And so I know when we are talking about making meals and stuff like that, we put a lot of focus on the food itself, but not so much on the space in which you're making the food. And we've talked a little bit about like where the elements show up in the kitchen. We've talked a bit about how you can consecrate certain tools, but I really want you guys to, think about a little bit the ways in which a kitchen itself becomes its own environment that needs to be set up for magic just as well. Here is how I like to prepare my space, both like just for my mental sake, so that my head's on right, and also, for any magic stuff. And I hope these tips can help you as well. So, let's get into it. So right away, I will, put a big disclaimer and say that this is not like some highfalutin influencer thing that I'm promoting here. I'm not really trying to say that you need all of these different tools or aesthetic setup to have a good environment for kitchen magic. What I am saying though is that you want to be able to set your space so that it is as least distracting and as most conducive to what you're trying to do as possible. And so the first thing that I personally start off with if I'm about to cook is I try to clean the kitchen at least to some extent. Namely, this means like getting dishes out of the sink because I'm going to need to have space in the sink so I can like wash things or chop things or something like that. It means getting stuff off the space that I'm going to be chopping and cutting on so that like I have room to maneuver things and put things down if I need to. And it means getting stuff off the stove. I mean, right, like sometimes you have things drying, sometimes you have things out, or maybe the oven is kind of a bit of a mess because I was just baking, so I have my pots and pans all over the place. Try to reset your kitchen as much as is reasonable, right? Like I'm not saying you have to deep clean, spot clean everything, but try and get the clutter out of the way. Try and free up your space, because when you do that, you're going to just have a much tidier, neater space that gives you the room to do what you need to do. If you have a cramped kitchen and there's a lot of stuff going on and it doesn't feel like you have any space to move, that's neither good for your ability to actually cook and focus, nor is it good for any magic you're trying to do. And if we are talking about tools though, I will say that like of course you can get some really interesting tools. I mean, like you might want to invest in a couple pieces that will help. For instance, the walnut cutting board I have is really cool. It's really nice, and walnut itself has many of its own magical properties, but that is not necessary. This was a Christmas gift as a board, so it's not exactly something that like is reasonable for me to say, yeah, just go get this board. It's a pretty fancy one, but you don't need a walnut cutting board to do stuff like that. You can take any of your favorite spoon or your favorite cutting board, whichever one you have, and charm those just as well so that they can kind of act as a springboard for any magic that you're doing on them. But if you really can't find like any tools or anything that you would want to charm with magic like that, one thing that I found really helpful is when, like, if you just write a psalm or some kind of spell down on a piece of paper and put it under your cutting board, that can be all you need to further charge whatever it is that you're doing with a certain intention. So, yeah, you could just stand over the pot when the meal's finished and do the magic right there. That's usually what I do as well. But if you want to have it from start to finish, the entire ritual setup, then doing something like that is really helpful because it's like a push pin, right, for your intention. So you can set your intention, and every food that you prep on that board, under, on top of that psalm, that just furthers the energy that's going into the pot so that when you do your finale, it all kind of comes together in one big harmony. These are the things that, get you more mentally into what you're doing as well, right? So especially if you're like me and you're running around and you're kind of cooking and sometimes you just kind of forget to do the magic entirely because you're so focused on not burning your food, that's a good way to kind of keep that focus and keep that intention going, and it's something that just adds more to the space itself, right? So you don't need to have any fancy items, but if you have a psalm that pretty much encapsulates what you're going for, and every time you look at it, that reminds you of what you're cooking the meal for. And speaking of things to look at, there's a reason I start my, dinner made magic recipes with all the ingredients laid out first. I do that so you can see pretty much exactly what's in it, and also so you can identify the raw components that are going into it. Because obviously at the end of the meal, it's hard to see where the oregano went in a sauce, right? It just looks like specks now, you can't distinguish it. If you see the bucket of oregano on the table, if you see, the leaves of the beets that you had, if you see the actual items that you're working with and remind yourself of that, you're going to be able to point out exactly what you want to use for your magic. You're going to have it nearby. You're going to be able to kind of, focus on it, think about it a little bit as you go around the rest of your prep. That prep work is very important because it helps you identify what exactly it is you're trying to do with that meal, and also it just gets it all prepared and ready to go so that you're not scrambling for it and ruining your focus later. And lastly, one of my favorite things to do to set the energy of a space that has nothing to do with what a place looks like or how aesthetic it is or what tools you have is honestly just go get some really good music on. Music that helps you focus, music that raises the energy. This is what's going to help you when it comes down to actually, putting that energy into a meal. So for me, music is one of the best ways that I can kind of get, hyped up and ready to do a bunch of different work. And so when I have the music going, it really helps me kind of orient myself in space, get more into what I'm doing, right? It's no longer just a chore. Now it's something that's a bit more fun. Kind of takes the I have to out of it, so I can just focus more on what I want to do with it instead of what I have to do with it. Because at the end of the day, right, cooking is still kind of a chore, and doesn't matter if you're a kitchen witch or not. I mean, not all of us like cooking. I certainly never used to like cooking. So if I can find other ways to get myself invested in what I'm doing, that is a great way to get the magic to continue going and to make the whole kitchen a nice space where that kind of work can happen. People take for granted how much magic is a mental thing, and so therefore, the more ways you can get to mentally situate yourself in the magic that you're doing, the better your magic comes out. And this is why ceremonial magic is the way that it is. If you guys, know the difference between ceremonial magic and witchcraft, one of the biggest differences is how much, as they say, ritual, how much ceremony, how much procedure is involved, because each step gets the magician further and further into the mindset to do the work that they're doing. Witchcraft doesn't always have the same focus on that ritual and that procedure. There is ritual work, and it's very complicated and whatever, but a lot of people don't see something like kitchen witchcraft as the same. And that's silly, because the act of cooking itself is one long ritual. It takes so much time, it takes so many steps. And so when you're able to really create that magic bubble that is that kitchen space, you're able to, just like the ceremonial magician, get into each of those steps, make them intentional, make them more meaningful, and incorporate them into one very, big story of the spell that you are weaving. So I hope that helps you reframe this concept of the kitchen as a magic space and setting up that mise-en-scène as we were talking about. And I wish you guys a great rest of your week. See ya!